I'm Ken Kelly, and I've got a real burning passion for counselling skills. I've built training that takes the doubt out of using counselling skills. You get to see the counselling skills used in real live sessions by a qualified therapist. Full sessions, real material, real counselling skills. To find out more, go to counsellingskillsacademy.com.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you today, Ken?
I'm good. Thank you very much for asking, Rory, and we hope that you are good joining us on the Counselling Tutor Podcast. It's episode 220. 3 stops on today's journey, starting off with counselling foundations, visiting the strong foundations we need to build our counselling practices on. And we're going to be looking at equality and diversity, an evergreen topic, so important, and it changes over time. So that's an important one. And then focus on self is our second stop, where we recognize that you as the practitioner, you are the heartbeat of your practice. Whether you're a student, whether you are qualified, it doesn't matter. You form the base, the kernel of what it is that you do. And today we're going to be looking at supervision, choosing your supervisor if you don't have one, or maybe even considering moving supervisors if you are already in a long-term supervision relationship. Our final stop today is an exciting one. We are stopping off at Practice Matters. That's where we dip our toe into the pool that is practice, and we look at the running of a practice, what we may come across, client presentations. And today, really interesting for me, Rory, you met up with Amy Launder, and it's all about millennial clients. And there is a difference, isn't there? I mean, we often see the specialist training on working with somebody that may be considered an elderly client. But when we look to millennials, there's a certain way that they present, and culturally, I guess, they have a certain frame of reference that we need to be aware of. So that's episode 220, Counselling Tutor Podcast, starting with those foundations, equality and diversity. Have we not heard enough of equality and diversity yet, Rory?
No. The answer to that is a firm no, and the reason for that is that equality and diversity are so important, and certainly for people of my generation. I at the time of recording this, I'm hurtling towards being 64 years young. I can remember a time when it was a very, very bad time, certainly here in the UK, for equality and diversity, where people were dismissed because of disabilities, the colour of the skin, the religion, being a woman. I mean, I can still remember a time where women, when they got married, had to leave work. I mean, it just doesn't even compute that now, does it? And if you were a different religion, you're barred from certain jobs. And thankfully, we've become more progressive through the years. And really, one of the big punctuations of that, and I use the word very thoughtfully, punctuations, was the 2010 Equality Act in the UK. And the reason I use the word punctuations, it's usually a punctuation in a sentence is usually where you pause. And I think the Equality Act was a bit of a pause where people thought, well, we've done that now. We've got that legislation in. But of course, as we know, equality and diversity is progressive. And indeed, for those of you who follow the podcast, I interviewed Mahmoud Ahmed in podcast 182, where we talked about having specific diversity training, race and culture training. Yeah. So it is current. And I think that it's not really good enough, certainly in our profession, just to fall back on that punctuation and say, well, we've got that legislation now, and that's all done. We're all good. It's progressive, and we need to be very thoughtful about working with our diverse clients and indeed our colleagues.
Yeah, it's about. I always look at this, and I think it's about us. It's about us as individuals and how we see the world. It's our frame of reference and how we get kind of challenged on that as we go through. We may get messages, and you were speaking about you You mentioned your age there, Rory, and boy, are you looking good. And if anybody wants to see what Rory and I look like, you can catch our podcast. It is available on YouTube. Go to YouTube, put in Counselling Tutor Podcast, and you can actually see us doing it, and we can wave to you. I'm waving right now. Hello.
I'm waving too.
And I think that, we grow up and we get certain messages as we're growing up. We are people of our time. We develop our self-concept and our frame of reference based on what we are taught and the messaging that we are given. But as you say, Rory, that this is a progressive. I want to say progressive progression. I'm really struggling. This is progressive in that it is. I think that we're becoming more and more educated about people, about rights, about equality, about diversity. And, I look to Carl Rogers, and he speaks about that unconditional positive regard. And the word there is unconditional positive regard. Not if you meet certain criteria and you fall within certain boundaries that I myself find acceptable, then you get this. It is unconditional positive regard. And that's all it is. Equality and diversity, it can be a pretty dry subject when you're studying it as a student, specifically when you are looking to the legislation. Legislation is not written in the most entertaining manner. It can be pretty dry on the page. But at the end of the day, it's about acceptance and inclusion of all, and just being open and warm. No matter who that person is, they are a fellow human being. Anything other than that is us putting a filter or a label on who that person is.
Yeah, and to be honest, Ken, I'm going to be really honest when we're talking about race and culture. I feel a bit of a fraud talking about this because I'm a white older man, so my frame of reference is going to be completely different to someone whose skin color or faith position is different, because we're going to see the world through a different prism.
Yeah.
And moreover, the world is going to see us through a different prism, and I think that's something we need to think about. And one of the things that really, really strikes me is that, when you talk about progression, I think progressive progression. I think it's within all of us. It's an endeavor. It's something we should strive for. So we should all, take some time to think about, are we working in an inclusive way? What don't we know? And sometimes, you don't know what you don't know. Doing some training on race and culture or disability. Or trying to maybe I've read a number of books on feminism, which has given me a view to the world that I didn't have as a man. And I think it's really important that we build this into our CPD calendar all the time. It's just not something we tick off. And I'm going to be a bit controversial here, Ken. I think that first trainings maybe don't have the bandwidth to cover it in depth, to cover equality, diversity in depth. I don't want to be disrespectful to our colleagues who teach, who are working so hard in this, I know, but I think that they can sometimes be hampered by the curriculum because it's almost a course on its own, I think.
It is. And it's offered as a course on its own from multiple places. And, I really like that you touched on that. When I was speaking earlier, I was speaking about that value of inclusion. And that's a value you hold within yourself. But without the education that comes along with that, without informing ourselves, we can only see what we can see. Our vision, our frame of reference is blinkered by what we know. If you think about it, your frame of reference is everything you know, the experiences you've had in your life, who you are, your culture. And one of the big factors of that is your learning. If there's something that sits outside of your learning, it's not within our frame of reference often. And by doing continued professional development, by looking and seeking out relevant training, it expands what we can see. And inclusion, I guess, becomes it's tricky. I'm trying to find the words here. Without seeing it, we can be overstepping a line that we don't even know is there because we haven't educated ourselves. We can interpret something through our frame of reference and get it wrong when it comes from a client. We can say something that might be disrespectful, not meaning it, and that not being our intention, but because we don't see it, we don't know it, we don't understand it. And I think that's where training is so important, that continuing development in service of those that we serve. And I agree with you, Rory. In base training, look, it's woven through the whole of the curriculum.
It is.
It is woven through the whole of the curriculum. We do know that. But it tends to just be the facts. It tends just to be that legislation. It tends to be just that look at your own values and have a think about that and journal about that. And I understand that we can't go into every one of the areas that are considered as the protected areas within the legislation, or even those that sit outside of that, because there'd be no space to learn counselling along that road. And we talk about the update of that legislation, and since then, what has become popular is neurodiversity, which is not mentioned in the updated Equalities Act, and maybe that will be revisited again at a later stage, and maybe we'll see that progression, Rory, our new word, as we go forward, and things are updated.
Well, I hope so. And of course, we've got a super duper handout for you. So all you have to do is to go to podcast 220, go to counsellingtutor.com, find the podcast tab. It's podcast episode 220. We've got a super duper handout waiting for you. And within that super duper handout, there's something called the Big Seven. And it is a alternative view and quite an authoritative view on equality and diversity. And the one thing they mention that isn't covered in the Equalities Act is class. Yeah. And I think that's a big one. And it's a growing edge of being aware of, where you sit in terms of your own privilege. And it's something that I think we could do with looking at. Maybe we need some legislation around that to think about, get people to think about where they are in terms of the kind of, I hate to use the word hierarchy, but our society's built on them.
Yeah.
That's the problem, isn't it? Our society's built on hierarchies.
And it's interesting you mentioned class, because I found out about class when I immigrated to the United Kingdom. So I was born in the UK, but my parents immigrated away to South Africa when I was very young. And it's less of a word there. I hadn't heard it in South Africa. But there again, there I was living in South Africa as a privileged white male at a time that was really, really tricky.
Indeed.
And there were the challenges of that country that it faced at that time because of the apartheid regime. It was really interesting. I can look back on my journey and see what messages I was taught in school, looking around at a whites-only school. And I'd come from the United Kingdom where it wasn't that way, and I was asking questions, and they were shushed. I was shushed. I was just told this is how it is. This is how it is. And it's interesting, as a malleable child at the time, I went, oh, okay, then that's the way it is. But what's interesting is it was very different. In South Africa, it wasn't about class. And of course, if we look to India, we might be speaking about the caste system and how and how that may work. So this is so relevant to who you are, where you are, the client group you're working with, and the legislation you work within. I guess it changes depending on where we might find ourselves, but the basis of it remains the same. It's that open, warmth, inclusion, recognition of a fellow human being.
Yes, and acknowledging difference. The idea that, well, we're all the same. I'll treat everybody the same. It's a wonderful way of thinking, but actually you have to make adjustments because people aren't the same. Their experiences aren't the same. In some cases, the way the law's framed isn't the same. And I will, as we move on from this topic, I'll leave you with this thought. Up until kind of November of 2020, if anybody asked me, what race are you? I said, well, I'll be English. I'm English, obviously English. I had my DNA tested. Mrs. Counselling Tutor bought me a DNA test for Christmas, and I did it. And it came back, and lo and behold, I'm half Irish. I'm a quarter Scottish, and a quarter Welsh. I'm not actually English. And it's like, I mean, I guess Rory's the clue in the name. That's quite an Irish name, isn't it? But it did leave me thinking that actually, you know, I am diverse. Of course, it's a diversity in name only because I'm a white male, and you know the privilege that comes with that. But it's interesting to think that I started off thinking, I'm obviously English, and now when the box comes to tick any forms who you are, my pen's hesitating, Ken. It hovers.
Yeah, and if you think about what you've just said there, because you have information and a view on who you are that you didn't have before you undertook that test, and there's the key, isn't it? That we inform ourselves, and when we inform ourselves, our frame of reference changes. Over the course of a few weeks, one box that you would have ticked, you now hesitate and you question, and that's what these podcasts are about, getting us to have the discussions, to ask ourselves those questions. And that, of course, is our Counselling Foundations. And we move away from Counselling Foundations just with that reminder to get your handout of Rory's super duper equality and diversity handout. Go to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, episode 220. You're going to find it there within the show notes. We now move on to that focus on self, where we recognize you are the heartbeat of your practice. We need to look to ourselves, make sure we're okay in order to be there for our clients. And of course, supervision is one of the main ways that we stay okay. But choosing a supervisor, getting the right supervisor, knowing what to look for is tricky. And so is moving a supervisor. You know, if you've got a supervisor you may have been working with for some time, when is it time to move? So supervision, an interesting area, Rory.
It is, and I think it's, you know, I've said this now, and I make no apology for it. I think it's really important that we can choose our own supervisor. Now, there is a caveat in that. Some people listening will say, I can't. I have a supervisor allocated to me. That may be because it's part of a placement package. As a student, you are given a placement, and as part of that, you have to have your own supervision in-house, and you may work in an organisation that provides supervision. With that said, I still believe that finding your own supervisor and feeling comfortable with a supervisor is really important for this reason, that you're less likely to hide clients. You're less likely to be more open, integrated. I'm going to use the word honest in the supervisionary session, because you'll feel supported, held, and you know, let's not forget, supervision shouldn't be a deficit model. Shouldn't be about like normal managerial supervision where you're told you have to improve this and that. The sandwich, it's sometimes called, you know, a nice outer layer, but sometimes a very difficult inner layer. I won't use the expletives that goes with that term, but it's really, really important. And I think also where you are on your journey, you may outstrip your supervisor. You may come to a point where you find that you need a different form of supervision, in which case you need to move on in supervision. But it's crucially important in our profession to have really supportive and enriching supervision.
I'm going to throw a word in, and that's challenging. Ooh. Challenging within supervision as well. You know, if your supervision is maybe once a month hooking up, having a cup of tea and a bit of a chat about how practice is going, and then leaving thinking what you're going to have for dinner that night, then maybe the supervision is not challenging you. Supervision is growth. It's a professional peer-to-peer relationship with somebody who is a little further down the road, in service of our client, but through us, you know, and to challenge us, to ask us that we get questions about how we're working, different ways of working, areas where we can do CPD. You know, we spoke in our last section about equality and diversity, and I know, Rory, that's something you would bring up as a supervisor with your supervisees. Yeah. I know I would bring that up with supervisees. It's an ever-growing, changing, challenging area for learning, development, enrichment. And if you're not finding that, then maybe it is time to consider. And we never tell people what to do here. We just have the conversations. No. We don't know all the answers. We're just two colleagues having a chat about topics we find important and interesting and that are suggested through our Facebook group. Go to Facebook, Counselling Tutor. That's where you'll find us. That's where these conversations come from. And of course, we train supervisors, Rory, and find that as supervisors are training with us, they often say, I think I need to move away from my current supervisor now.
Mm. Yes, and I think there's nothing like training as a supervisor to appreciate either what you're getting or seeing the deficits in what you're getting in supervision. And one of the comments from one of the students recently was that she was doing some skills practice with a peer, and she said, actually, I'm getting better supervision with a student than I am with my current supervisor.
Student on the supervision training.
On the supervision training, yes. And that's almost certainly sparked a thought process of do I look for a different supervisor? And it's not unusual now for somebody certainly who's practicing maybe EMDR or a different form of therapy to have a specific supervisor for that. I certainly supervise people who have very specialist niches and have a supervisor for that, and we contract around that because there's some areas of specialism that I'm not trained in. So I think we're now seeing the growth and the development and the flourishing of supervision, and it being not just a generic task that someone has to pitch up to for 1.5 hours a month, but specialist niche tasks where a therapist would go, and it's consultative. It's a consultative endeavor. You're going to consult and to try and kind of gain understanding of what's going on for you, your client, the environment. So it's really important that you choose well and choose a supervisor that's a good fit for you, I think.
And that kind of leads us on to how do you choose and what is a good fit for you? I mean, it's easy for us to go, oh, you got to choose the right supervisor. There you go. Moving on to our next topic. But it's tricky, isn't it? It's tricky. How do I know if this supervisor is a good fit for me? And I always try and relate this and parallel it to the process that a client goes through to find a counselor. There's a lot of consideration. Do they just click on the first thing that comes up in the directory or the Google search or the yellow pages or the pamphlet that they saw, or would they shop around? Would they maybe speak to a number of different therapists before making a decision? And when I was client facing, I would always suggest if a client was coming to see me for that first appointment to see if they were a fit, so I offered a free session, I would always say, make sure you go and check out other therapists, because you want to find someone who you're a fit with, because that relationship is so important. And I suggest the same if you're looking for a supervisor. Shop around. Most should be happy to meet with you to see if there is a values match, a fit of your modalities, that you can ask any questions, and that there shouldn't be a charge for that. Not everybody offers that, but have a look around and see if that is available for you, and meet with 3-4 and see how that feels with you. Who sits with you? What does your gut say? Who did you feel you connected with? And one of the bits of advice that I was given, if you feel, oh, I really like that person, that was great, maybe that's not the right person for you. Maybe if you feel a little bit challenged, if you feel a little bit, okay, this person kept me on my toes, maybe that's an indicator. But I'm speaking for myself now. That's what I look for. I look for that challenge. But shop around. There are many supervisors around. And when you're shopping around, keep in mind what your base modality is, how you work, and look for someone who's going to support you within your base modality, that understands how you work. So, for example, if you work as an online practitioner using Zoom, and you have trained in that and you hold a qualification in remote technology delivery of therapy, it wouldn't be a good fit to go to a supervisor who doesn't have that training and understanding, because you might be bringing parts of practice that I guess it's unseen to them. They wouldn't know what to ask or where to guide you on that if they're not trained in the technology.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I think I'm going to pick up on that theme. If you're a student listening to this, part of that training triad, if you like, you got your training organization you work with, college or your private training provider. You've got the agency that you're placed with, and then you have your supervisor. And they form what I call a magic pyramid. They're at four corners, you're in the middle, and they're trying to build your practice up. And in terms of supervision, you want a supervisor who understands the modality that you're practicing. I don't think it's useful for a trainee to work with a supervisor who says something like, say, doing person-centered. Well, person-centered is all right, but you want to try a bit of CBT, or you want to try a bit of TA, because I think that you need to be competent in your own theory. Certainly, even past qualifying, I would say you need to get really into the rhythm of your own theory, and then at some point find for yourself where that theory doesn't fit for you, and then look for any additions and become perhaps a little bit more integrative in your practice. So, when I supervise certainly students, I would find out the modality they're practicing in. It's usually person-centered, I have to say, and I would supervise getting them to think about how the theory links to their clients, and that's so helpful for things like case studies. Their practice in general, because they will be practicing in one modality usually. I mean, there are integrative models, and eventually when they qualify, they've had a thorough training. They've had the theory and the application of the theory in practice, and I think that's so useful. And then again, when someone qualifies and they're moving on into the world, they might think, well, I could do with, I've got a client who would really fit a more active directive model such as CBT. And that might be the opportunity to take a course, speak to your supervisor, and start to develop another string to your bow. So I think one of the key things is working with someone who understands and will help you develop your modality. And I'm with Ken. My first supervisor, I wrote about this in my book, Counselling, Training a Student's Guide, that my first supervisor, it was like a door being dipped in a bath of acid every time I went. And I say that in a loving way, because I needed a lot of outer layers removing before I went into practice. And it was a really good experience. But some of my peers said, I can't work with that supervisor. She's too strict, but she suited me down to the ground. I enjoyed every supervision session.
Yeah, it's like fashion, isn't it? Something that would suit somebody and really work for them might not suit somebody else. And I think really key message that you've shared there, Rory, and what we've been touching on here, and it's certainly woven into our supervision training that we deliver, and that is that there is an idiosyncratic element to supervision. As a supervisor, you will be working with the supervisee in a way that suits the level where they are along that road. That is really, really important, that a supervisor has the skill set to be able to work with you dependent on where you are. So Rory used the study example. You might need to see how the theory is really applying itself in practice, and the supervisor would help that student because recognizing that's where they are. But also it may be that you are now qualified and you are working your way to being an accredited member of your professional body. Well, you would expect that your supervisor would be able to help you along that road. And this is why when we look for a supervisor, we look for someone who is further down the road than ourselves. So if you've been in practice for 15 years and you think, I'm going to move my supervisor now, it is unlikely you're going to pick up a supervisor who has just recently qualified as a supervisor and has maybe been practicing for only 5 years or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think using the further down the road analogy, that doesn't mean they've been qualified for 15 years. That means they've been qualified for 15 years, but they've shown a progressive development in their own practice.
Yeah.
So you could have someone who's just left the college 15 years ago, never done any CPD, and they say, well, I've got 15 years experience. Well, I think that doesn't really roll now. I think there's experience, but also I would like to see some specialism, some other knowledge acquired, some training. CPD, of course, is we have to undertake 30 hours of CPD a year as therapists, and I'd like to see a progression. I'd like to see the CV, to be honest, and see what they've done to be able to say I've got 15 years experience. Yeah. I think that's really important, Ken.
Yeah, ask for that CV. And if you are kind of shopping around, and you are, I don't like the word shopping around for a supervisor, but I guess that's what it really is at the end of the day, isn't it? You're approaching different people. Recognize that you're making a choice here. This is a service provision that you pay for, in the same way as you might choose a car. You're going to be with it maybe for some time. Have a real think and be okay to ask questions. If you go for a pre-meeting with a supervisor, usually they'll ask you about your insurance, about your professional body, about your qualifications. They're going to be asking you questions to make sure that you're a fit for them. You have the right to ask questions back. How would you support me in X? What would you do if I had an ethical dilemma? What would happen if I needed to speak to you out of our supervision hours because something came up? I'm just thinking these up off the top of my head, but prepare some questions that you can go into related to your journey and where you find yourself that you can ask a supervisor, and see how they respond to you, because that's what it's about. It's about finding the right fit. Great topic, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken, and an absolute foundation stone of our practice.
And as we come out of this topic, Rory, it would be amiss for me to say that if you are a qualified practitioner, you have a minimum of 2 years practice experience, then you may qualify to train as a supervisor. So if you're interested, go to counsellingtutor.com. All the information is on the homepage. Just scroll down the page there and look for the Level 6 certificate in supervision, including online working. Click on that, and the information is there for you. Moving away now from our focus on self into our practice matters, where we look at what we may come across in our practice. And of course, speaking about millennial clients, Rory, and you spoke with Amy, who kind of walked you through some of the differences from a cultural perspective that we might kind of encounter.
Absolutely. We've worked with Amy Launder before, and she's produced a wonderful lecture called Working with Millennial Clients for the Counsellor CPD Library. Every generation that is born has a different experience of the world. And in this interview, Amy outlines why and what we have to be thoughtful of when working with clients who are born in and around the millennium. And I'm talking about the year 2000, because they've come into a different world, and they were born into a different world. And maybe I'm a baby boomer. So I was born after the Second World War. And of course, it's all about frame of reference, and millennial clients certainly have a different frame of reference. It's an interesting interview, and this is what Amy had to say.
Practice matters.
And we welcome Amy Launder, who's one of our regular presenters, who's done a fabulous lecture on millennials. So Amy, you're very, very welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So I think it's really interesting. What is it about millennials where we have to be thoughtful? And indeed, there's a second question there. What's a millennial?
Yeah, well, yeah, so first of all, a millennial is someone who was born between about 1981 and 1995, although some say it kind of goes up to 2000. So anyone at the moment around kind of late 20s to mid 30s or even 40s, if my maths is correct there. But which puts me right in the middle of that group. So I'm a millennial. I work with millennial clients as well. So I would say some of the things that we need to be thoughtful about when working with millennial clients is the types of things that they bring to therapy. Of course, they bring all sorts of things, as all clients do, but there seems to be real themes about what these clients bring to therapy. So one big one that I noticed is decision making. So difficulty making decisions, and a lot of that comes from the type of parents that millennials had growing up. So it's the kind of helicopter parents who swooped in or made decisions for them, or kind of created play for them rather than the kids kind of using their imagination. So they've never really grown up having to decide on things. Things were just decided for them in a way. So there's that. But then things like, if you look at kind of the way that millennials grew up, or the world that they grew up in, there's a lot of anxiety inducing events. So if you kind of look at 9/11, the 7/7 bombings, all of these things happened when a lot of millennials were kind of late primary school, early secondary school. And so they had a massive impact on the way that they grew up, and the kind of feeling of safety or lack thereof that we kind of experienced. So yeah,
it sounds to me, because I would be one of the baby boomer generation. It may be worth explaining this. Is that kind of social scientists kind of categorize people who have been born during certain time frames in a certain way. I was born in 1958. That makes me a baby boomer. A baby's born to those who'd been in the Second World War and the big boom afterwards, and then there's Gen X and Gen Y, and you can look it up. We may put some links in the show note page so people can understand that. But I guess I'm getting a sense from what you're saying is that a mixture of very, very traumatic, probably well publicised events, because we were just in the time, certainly in the 80s, of 24-hour TV. Shortly into the 90s, we got the internet, and therefore news became 24 hours, 7 days a week. And the fact that maybe baby boomer parents were a little overprotective of their offspring has caused a kind of generational anxiety. Is that how you'd put it?
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's a very interesting point, the kind of mix between the feeling of unsafety in the world around us and then the overprotective parents. And what that has led to for a lot of people is a lack of distress tolerance. So being able to be uncomfortable or even to be bored is something that a lot of millennial clients struggle with. And it's not really helped by the ever-present kind of technology which we can use to distract ourselves. So if you kind of think of yourself standing in the supermarket queue, as soon as you realize there's a queue, you get your phone out and you're scrolling on social media, because of not being able to deal with the boredom or the kind of intolerance of having to stand and wait for something. So that's also something very interesting that I noticed in how it comes up in therapy as well. It's that kind of wanting to solve things right now, wanting to have a quick fix rather than kind of looking at the longer term therapy.
Yes, and yes, and I was a school counsellor for 7 years, and I noticed that that kind of sort of intolerance of isolation, just being on your own. When I was a kid, my grandmother, who kind of brought me up, she taught me to kind of look at this, make shapes out of the sky and the clouds and things. A little bit about a bit like Plato's caves, really. Apart from the fact she probably never read Plato, my grandmother, but and it was that the foam being glued to them and the connection of what's going on and world events, and also I think. I mean, I don't know if you'd agree with me. There's been a massive politicalisation of people in the last 20 years. When we grew up, we weren't really political. The election was something that kind of went past us and other people talked about. But now I've noticed that people, certainly of the millennial age, and certainly the younger people, are really involved in politics, and sometimes it take the world on the shoulders a bit.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, it's the millennial generation tends to be the more kind of navel-gazing generation. So they are the self-improvement, self-development generation. But as you get younger, and the younger millennials and into the Gen Z, you get to the outside world focused generation. Yeah. So they are the ones who kind of will go to rallies or boycotts or all these kinds of things. They're kind of much more activists than previous generations. And so there's a lot of that anxiety about climate change and, all these different things that whilst they're very concerned about them, they maybe feel like they don't have power over them. So that's a very frustrating, anxiety-inducing thing as well.
So I wonder, as therapists working with millennial clients, and it just feel for me, I'll own it for myself, there is a bit of stereotyping there. We stuck a big label on people. You're a millennial, which is always an interesting process, isn't it? But how do we as therapists kind of work with that? What do we need to be thoughtful of, and what can we do?
Yeah, so I would say whilst we have stereotypes, millennials, and I'm putting myself in that category as well, it's also worth recognizing that I think the millennial generation is one of the widest generations that there is, that people have labeled. So the kind of years that millennials are born, there's a much wider gap than baby boomers or Gen Z and that kind of thing. So for example, like a millennial can have millennial parents nowadays because of the gap is so wide. So it's worth kind of noticing the differences between them. So for example, with social media, we assume that all millennials are all over social media, but actually a lot, especially again, the younger ones, have decided to go against that and not have any social media accounts at all. So it's kind of not assuming that we know what they're going through. One of the other things is the language that is used. And I think it's especially kind of prevalent over the last couple of years with the pandemic, where when a millennial or any client says, I spoke to my friends, that doesn't necessarily mean that they went and saw them face to face. That can mean they texted them, they DM'd them on social media, they FaceTimed them, and it's not minimizing the importance of those things. Yes. For someone who's grown up with social media and technology, talking to someone in that way is kind of as good as talking to someone face to face. For them, like the quality is maybe seen as the same.
Yeah. So I think that's the interesting one. Maybe some therapists, and use another label again, baby boomer therapists, may not understand that there's no boundary between corporeal, seeing someone in the flesh, and online, asynchronous and synchronous, if you want to use the modern terms for it. And that's something I learned as a school counsellor, that someone could be talking to someone and actually never see them in the flesh.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you mentioned boundaries as well, which is very important for all clients, but especially I think for the millennial clients who lack the distress tolerance and also are kind of all over social media as well, because there's a sense of they might, contact, email you, send you a WhatsApp message or something between sessions, because as soon as something comes up, they want to tell you about it. So it's kind of keeping that boundary, showing them that you've got the message and you've understood, but you'll talk about it in the next session. And then there's also especially the ones who are sharing all over social media rather than just consuming the social media. It's that lack of boundary within themselves and kind of oversharing with all their friends, with their family, with strangers on the internet, and then in therapy as well. So they might kind of dump everything in the first session and then become quite overwhelmed because it was actually too much.
That's quite an interesting thing, because one of the things we know about online therapy is the disinhibition effect, the work of John Suler, and his research was generated from exactly that. And I was talking to a colleague who'd done some research, and she was saying that one of the difficulties that like dating apps have now is that people massively overshare when they make initial contact and then feel very worried about what they've kind of shared. I want to pick up on this interesting observation you made about clients contacting you in between sessions. Now, usually people would say, well, I don't think this is a very good idea. What's your view on that? If you've got a millennial client and they may need some regulation, it sounds like they need regulation. What is the best way of dealing with that, do you think?
Yeah, what I would do is I would respond to the message, maybe not necessarily straight away. It depends on, what time of day it is. Might have been at midnight and I wouldn't respond straight away at that point. But I would respond and I would say, thank you for letting me know. we've got a session coming up on whichever day, let's talk about it more then. So it's showing them, they're being held and they've been seen and heard, but they can then hold it to the next session.
Uh-huh. I think that's interesting, being held. I'm quite taken with the work of Patricia Clarkson and the 5 relationship model. Part of that is what's called a repatriative style, and sometimes it's referred to as respectful reparenting. Do you think there is a larger element of respectful reparenting when you're working with millennials?
I think that there definitely can be, especially if they've had the very overprotective parent who has taken away any stress or any anxiety that might have come up, who's kind of swooped in and rescued. So they might be looking for the counsellor, for the therapist to rescue whenever something comes up. So it's letting them know that they have the capacity to hold things that are distressing rather than to panic. And it's kind of also normalizing as well. There's a lot of pathologizing, self-pathologizing that goes on with millennials, and I think maybe they've seen it with their parents, and parents have labeled them or labeled themselves, but it's also all over social media and online. If you follow mental health accounts or therapist accounts or other people who are kind of going on their own journey, there's a lot of labels out there, and clients will kind of see one and attach onto it, and then they will say, I am anxious, I am depressed, I am this and that, and they might be, but it's also, a little bit of worry doesn't necessarily mean that they have anxiety.
Yes.
And so it's kind of normalizing the labels as well as the reparenting.
Yes. So a little bit about kind of the actuality of it, as opposed to what Facebook might have to say this week.
Yes. Yeah. What the buzzword is that week. Yeah.
Yes. So you've done a fabulous lecture for us. What do you hope that those who watch the lecture will take away from it?
Yeah. So my main aim was just kind of more understanding of the nuances of working with millennial clients. Not necessarily, having to change the way that you work, or it's just more understanding and more appreciation maybe of the way the millennials have grown up and the way their parents have grown up as well. Like you said, it's if they've got a baby boomer parent, they might be one way. If they had a millennial parent, they might have been parented slightly differently. So kind of digging into that a bit more as well, looking into the generation of the parent of the client as well, and just being a bit more curious about what it is that the client is going through and how they've been brought up.
Well, I mean, it's a fabulous lecture, and I think it's a lecture of our time, because it's becoming more apparent that generations are experiencing the world very differently, mainly because the world's a very different place. And we have to be thoughtful of that as therapists. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. So Amy Launder, thank you very much.
Big thank you, as always, to Amy Launder. Thank you to you, Rory, for hosting that interview. And of course, if you are interested in learning more about this topic, working with millennial clients, there is a great lecture. It is in the Counsellor CPD library. Just go to counsellingtutor.com. Right there on the homepage, you can see information about our CPD library. If you're already a member of the CPD library, log in and enjoy the lecture. This has been episode 220 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, and it's been, I think, a very interesting discussion. We started off with equality and diversity in counselling, talking about how it's not a punctuation, but it's a continuation of how we work and how we consider others in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. Focused on self, we talked about choosing your supervisor and why having the right fit for you is a benefit for you, but crucially for your clients. And then in Practice Matters, we had an interview with the wonderful Amy Launder, who talks about working with millennial clients. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counselor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counselor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice For more information on the Counsellor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.